When Keanu Reeves and Sydney Sweeney shared words, no one expected the room was full of quiet voices, the kind of hum that comes before something important. Cameras were ready, lights were set, and everyone in the hall waited for the moment to begin. Yet in that silence, one detail stood out. Keanu Reeves sat at the edge of the stage, his hands resting softly together, his eyes calm but distant. Across from him, Sydney Sweeney leaned forward, almost as if she could sense that something more than a simple interview was about to happen. No one knew that the words they would share tonight would travel far beyond the walls of that room. Keanu had lived many years under the public eye, but tonight he looked more human than ever, almost fragile. The audience could see it. There was no mask of fame, no shield of distance. He was simply himself. And Sydney, younger, full of energy, watched him with a kind of respect that was rare. She admired him not for the movies, not for the fame, but for the way he carried pain with quiet strength. And though the crowd expected laughter or a casual story, what came instead was a kind of stillness that no one could have planned. The host asked a light question, something about movies and roles. Keanu smiled politely, answered softly, but then paused. The pause was longer than anyone expected, and in that pause the room began to shift. People leaned forward. Even Sydney's smile faded into concern. She could sense the weight in his silence. And then he spoke again, but this time it was not about movies. It was about life. His voice was steady, but it carried a sadness that touched every heart in that hall. He spoke of loss, of the times when he thought he could not go on, and of the way silence at night sometimes felt heavier than words. Sydney did not plan to speak next, but she did. Her words broke the tension like soft rain falling on dry ground. She told him, and the audience, that she too had felt moments when the world seemed too heavy. She admitted that there were nights when she sat alone, feeling like no one would ever understand. Her voice shook at first, but then grew stronger. She was not speaking to the cameras or the audience. She was speaking directly to Keanu, as if he was the only one in the room who could truly hear her. The crowd held its breath. Two lives, different in age, different in journey, had found a bridge in honesty. Their words were not planned, not written on a script. They were real, and because they were real, they carried weight. Keanu looked at her with quiet eyes, eyes that had seen enough of the world to know when someone was telling the truth. And in that moment, respect grew between them, not as stars, not as celebrities, but as humans who understood each other's hidden battles. But beneath the surface of that moment, there was more. There was a tension no one could see, a story that had not yet been told. The audience thought they had witnessed the heart of the night, but the truth was only beginning to unfold. Because when two people open their hearts in front of the world, it is never just words. It is the start of something larger. Kindness grows, but so does curiosity, and so do the shadows that surround it. The ending of the evening came with applause, but the silence between Keanu and Sydney spoke louder than the noise. The audience left with smiles, but the weight of those words followed them out the door. People would replay them, share them, wonder about them. And Keanu and Sydney, as they walked off stage, knew that their unexpected honesty had set into motion something that could not be undone. This was only the first part of their story. The world believed it had seen a simple exchange of words, but what no one knew was that those words would soon grow into moments that tested resilience, revealed kindness, and uncovered truths neither of them expected to face. The next morning, the world was already speaking. Clips of the night before spread across phones and screens, shared by people who had felt something deep when Keanu and Sydney spoke. It was not just an interview anymore. It was a moment that seemed to touch everyone who had ever felt alone. Strangers commented that they cried watching it. Others said they felt hope. What no one knew was how much it had shaken the two people at the center of it. For Keanu and Sydney, the night had not ended with applause. It had left an echo inside them. Keanu sat alone in his quiet home. He had lived through years of questions, interviews, and cameras. Most of the time he answered with grace, then went back to his solitude. But this was different. He replayed Sydney's words in his mind. He could hear the honesty in her voice, the way she admitted her own struggles without hiding. It made him think of how rare it was to hear truth spoken so openly, especially on a stage meant for performance. And for the first time in years, he felt like someone had looked at him not as a star, but as a man who carried scars. Sydney, meanwhile, could not sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the way Keanu's silence had filled the room before he spoke. She remembered the way his eyes seemed to hold a weight she could not name. She had always admired him, but now she felt something more, an almost protective respect. She knew the world loved him for his kindness and humility, but she had seen something deeper, a man who carried grief with quiet strength. And she wondered if she had said too much, if her honesty had been too raw. Yet, deep down, she knew she had spoken what needed to be said. The following days grew heavier. Everywhere they went, people asked about that moment. Reporters framed it as a surprising exchange. Fans wrote long posts about how it inspired them. But for Keanu and Sydney, the attention felt complicated. People saw their words, but not the silence behind them. They saw the clip, but not the unseen truth that those words had only scratched the surface of. The weight of expectation began to grow, and with it came the quiet conflict between living for the public and keeping something personal. Then came the call. Sydney's voice trembled slightly when she asked if they could meet. She told Keanu that she could not stop thinking about the night. He listened, his calm voice steady as always, but she could sense he had been feeling the same. They agreed to meet somewhere quiet, away from cameras, away from lights, where no one could turn their words into headlines. They chose a small cafe, one where the windows were covered with plants and the tables were tucked into corners. It was the kind of place where conversations could breathe. When they sat across from each other, the silence was different from the stage. It was not heavy with expectation. It was gentle, almost comforting. Keanu looked at her and said, "Your words that night, they reminded me of things I had buried." She listened closely, not interrupting. He told her of nights when he had lost people he loved, of the way grief had made him question if kindness could survive in a world so full of pain. His voice did not break, but his honesty made her eyes grow wet. Then Sydney spoke. She told him of her own battles, of moments when pressure made her feel like she was losing herself, of the loneliness that came with being watched by the world but not truly known by it. She admitted that when she heard his silence on stage, she recognized it, because she had felt it too. The connection between them deepened, not through grand speeches, but through quiet truths shared over coffee. But there was a twist neither of them expected. As they spoke, a man from another table watched them closely. He was not a fan, not someone who wanted a picture. He was someone who saw the weight in their words and wanted to use it. His phone was already out, capturing pieces of their private conversation, turning something honest into something for others to consume. They did not notice yet, but the shadow of that act was already stretching toward them. By the time they left the cafe, they felt lighter, as if speaking the truth had given them both a kind of relief. They did not know that their private moment was no longer private. They did not know that the world was about to twist their honesty into something else, something that would test not only their resilience, but also their kindness. The morning after their quiet meeting, the storm began. What they thought was a private moment at a cafe was now plastered across the internet. Shaky phone footage showed them leaning close, speaking in low voices, and the captions ran wild. Some claimed they were confessing secrets. Others said it was the start of a hidden story between them. Headlines twisted their words into something sensational, something far from the truth. By noon, both Keanu and Sydney saw themselves on every platform, not as two people sharing honesty, but as characters in a story they did not write. Keanu was used to attention, but this felt different. He had guarded his private life for years, never letting the world step too close. Now, something fragile and real had been taken and turned into noise. Sitting in his home, he scrolled through the endless flood of comments. Some were kind, some cruel, but all missed the point. None of them saw the simple truth, that he and Sydney had only shared pain and respect, nothing more. Yet he knew he could not stop the wave once it started. Fame had always been like this, giving and taking without asking permission. Sydney's reaction was more fragile. She was younger, still learning how to survive under the weight of constant eyes. She read the headlines with her heart racing. She saw strangers judging her, creating stories about her character, questioning her motives. She wanted to explain, to shout the truth, but she knew that no matter what she said, people would twist it again. Her hands shook as she put her phone down. Tears blurred her vision, not because of what was said, but because something that had felt so healing with Keanu was now poisoned by the outside world. When they spoke later that evening, their voices carried both exhaustion and strength. Keanu's tone was calm, steady, as if he had seen storms like this before. He told her that the world always demands a story, even when the truth is simple. He told her not to let their words lose meaning just because others refused to understand. Sydney listened, her voice breaking when she admitted she felt small under the weight of it all. And then he said something she did not expect. Sometimes the only way to protect something real is to let the world misunderstand it. What matters is that you and I know the truth. Those words settled into her heart like a quiet anchor. She realized that the connection they had built was not meant for approval, not meant for headlines. It was meant for them. And yet, the challenge grew heavier, because once the world believes a story, it does not easily let go. Over the next days, they found themselves avoiding cameras, avoiding places where their presence could spark new rumors. But even in the silence, they felt a bond that was unshaken. It was built not on appearances, but on honesty. Still, the storm had another layer. The man who had filmed them was not satisfied with one video. He wanted more, and he began following them, hoping to capture more moments to sell. Shadows moved around them without their notice, watching, waiting. Keanu sensed it first. He felt the familiar presence of eyes on him, the quiet pressure of being observed. His instincts, sharpened by years of attention, told him that this was not just fame, it was intrusion. He warned Sydney to be careful, to trust her steps. She nodded, but her heart grew uneasy. Despite the chaos, they continued to meet in secret, not to hide from the world, but to keep alive the honesty they had found. Each time they spoke, they shared more than before, stories of family, of loss, of dreams that had almost slipped away. They found comfort in the fact that neither judged the other, that both carried shadows but still chose kindness. And slowly, their private world became stronger than the noise outside. They knew they could not control what others believed, but they could control how they faced it, together, with respect and resilience. But the storm was not done. One evening, as they prepared to leave a quiet place, Keanu received a message from a friend in the industry. It was a warning. The man who had filmed them had already sold another video, one that twisted their latest meeting into something it was not. It was about to spread, bigger than before. And this time, the weight of misunderstanding would test them harder than ever. The second video spread faster than the first. This time, the man had captured them walking together in silence after another private meeting. The camera angle made it look intimate, like two people holding a secret too heavy to carry. Captions twisted the image further. Strangers online began to argue, some saying it was friendship, others claiming it was something hidden and scandalous. The truth, once again, was lost. By the end of the day, millions had seen it, and the storm became louder than ever. Sydney felt the weight first. Her phone buzzed endlessly with messages, calls, and questions she did not know how to answer. Agents wanted statements, fans demanded clarity, and critics sharpened their words. She shut herself in her apartment, curtains drawn, afraid to even look outside. What hurt most was not the rumors, but the way her honesty with Keanu had been taken and reshaped into something unrecognizable. Her heart felt fragile, as though every beat carried a question. Had they made a mistake by speaking at all? Keanu, however, responded differently. He had lived through storms of attention before. He knew that silence could sometimes be louder than words, but even for him, this time was different. It was not just about him, it was about Sydney. He could see how the noise was crushing her spirit, and he could not stand by and let it destroy the very light that had shone so brightly in their shared honesty. He reached out to her, speaking with a calmness that was steady even in chaos. He reminded her that storms pass, and that strength is often quiet, not loud. Yet as they spoke, another layer of the storm revealed itself. The man who had filmed them had grown bold. He began following them more openly, hoping to provoke something that could be captured. His eyes were not searching for truth, but for a moment, he could sell. Keanu noticed him one evening, lingering too close, pretending to be another passerby. He did not confront him then, but his heart grew heavy. He knew that this was no longer just about words. It was about intrusion into the private spaces that every human deserves. One night, they met again, this time in a small park where the lamps glowed softly against the quiet sky. Sydney's voice shook as she confessed that she felt broken by the constant noise. She asked if maybe they should stop meeting, stop talking, if only to end the weight pressing down on them. Keanu listened carefully. He did not answer quickly. Instead, he let the silence hold her words until he was sure of his own. Then, in a voice steady and low, he told her that kindness should never retreat from noise. He told her that what they had shared was too honest to be surrendered to shadows. His words gave her strength, but the fear still lingered. She wondered if kindness could survive in a world that twisted everything. He reminded her that resilience is not about escaping storms, but about walking through them with dignity. His calmness was like a lighthouse in the chaos, showing her that even in darkness, there was direction. She nodded, tears in her eyes, realizing that this bond was not fragile. It was stronger than she had believed. But the storm had one more turn that night. As they walked away from the park, they noticed the same man again. This time, he was closer, his phone raised, his face half hidden. Keanu stopped, his calm expression unchanging but his eyes firm. He walked over slowly, not with anger, but with quiet authority. He told the man, in a voice that carried both kindness and warning, that some moments are not meant to be stolen. The man said nothing, only stepped back, but his silence did not promise an end. It promised more shadows to come. As Keanu and Sydney left the park, they both knew the truth. The world would not stop watching, and the noise would not fade quickly. But they also knew something deeper, that honesty had already bound them together, and no headline could break that. What they had was rare, and sometimes rare things demand resilience stronger than the storms that surround them. The days that followed grew heavier than either of them imagined. The world was no longer just watching, it was demanding answers. Every magazine, every online page, every show spoke of them as though they belonged to the public, as though their private honesty was something for strangers to dissect. For Sydney, it became almost unbearable. She could not walk down the street without whispers following her. She could not glance at her phone without reading false stories built on their silence. And the more she stayed quiet, the louder the noise became. Keanu, though calm on the surface, felt the weight too. He carried it differently, with steady steps and soft words, but inside, he knew the danger of such storms. They did not just fade, They shaped the way people were seen, sometimes unfairly, sometimes permanently. He thought of his own past, of times when silence had been both a shield and a burden. He did not want Sydney to be crushed under the same lessons. So one evening, he called her, his voice firm but gentle. He told her they needed to decide how to face this, not with fear, not with hiding, but with honesty stronger than the noise. They met again, this time in a quiet studio borrowed from a friend. The world outside felt distant as they sat together in the empty space. Sydney's eyes were tired, but her spirit was still alive. She asked him if they should speak publicly, tell the truth, explain everything. Keanu paused. He looked at her with steady eyes and said that sometimes the truth is not about explaining to everyone. Sometimes the truth is about standing firm even when the world chooses not to believe. He reminded her that honesty between them mattered more than the lies outside. But the pressure grew when the second video was twisted again, turned into stories that painted them in ways that hurt. Agents warned them. Friends gave advice. Some said to release a statement, others said to stay silent. The noise of too many voices became another storm of its own. Sydney broke down that night, admitting that she felt she was losing control of her own story, her own voice. Keanu listened closely, then placed his hand gently over hers. He told her something simple but powerful. They can steal the story, but they cannot steal who you are. Those words lit a fire inside her. She realized she had been giving too much power to the noise. The truth was still hers, still theirs. And even if the world refused to see it, she could choose how to live with dignity. Resilience was not about winning against lies. It was about holding on to kindness in spite of them. Together, they decided not to release statements, not to fight the storm with the same weapons the world used. Instead, they chose to let their actions speak, to live quietly but with honesty. Yet, shadows still lingered. The man who had filmed them grew reckless. He released fragments of private moments, pieces that told no full story but enough to stir more chaos. Strangers consumed them eagerly, never questioning what was real. And soon, the storm reached a breaking point. One evening, a news outlet contacted Sydney directly, claiming to have something more, something private they should never have had. Her heart sank as she realized that the intrusion was deeper than she thought. Keanu, when she told him, grew silent for a long moment. Then he said softly, "This is no longer just noise. It is a test of how far they will go, and how strong we must remain." That night, as they sat together again, the weight of it all pressed hard against them. Yet, in the silence, there was also strength. They were no longer strangers who had shared words on a stage. They were two souls bound by honesty, walking through storms with resilience. The world could twist, the shadows could follow, but what they carried between them was untouched. And though the hardest test still lay ahead, they both knew they would face it not alone, but side by side. The peak of the storm arrived without warning. The news outlet that had contacted Sydney released a full report, claiming they had exclusive information. It was built on fragments, twisted words, and private images stolen without permission. What had once been whispers was now loud accusation. Strangers debated as if they knew the truth, forgetting that they were speaking about two human beings with hearts and scars. It was no longer curiosity. It was invasion. Sydney sat frozen as she read the story. Her hands trembled, her chest tightened, and tears rolled down her cheeks. She whispered to herself that it was not fair, that something so pure had been turned into something ugly. She felt like the honesty she had shared with Keanu had been stolen from her and reshaped into something cruel. She wondered if speaking her truth had been a mistake. She wondered if the world was too loud for kindness to survive. Keanu found her that evening. He knocked on her door gently, and when she opened it, her eyes were red. She tried to speak, but the words broke into sobs. He did not rush her. He simply stepped inside, closed the door, and sat with her in silence. After a long pause, he finally spoke. His voice was low, steady, and kind. "Sydney, I know it feels like they took everything, but they didn't. They only took what they could twist. What we shared, the truth of it, still belongs to us. No headline can touch that." She listened, her breathing uneven, but his words settled into her heart. She realized he was right. The world could twist, lie, and steal, but it could not erase the real connection between them. Yet, the pain still lingered. She asked him how he had lived through storms like this before. He told her that resilience is not about being unshaken. It is about being broken and still choosing to stand. He admitted that there were nights when he felt crushed by the weight of lies, but he had learned that kindness was always stronger than noise. His honesty gave her strength. She lifted her eyes and told him that she did not want to run away anymore. She wanted to stand, even if her voice shook. He smiled softly, a rare smile filled with warmth. He told her that standing together was always easier than standing alone. And in that moment, a bond that had begun with unexpected words on a stage grew into something unbreakable. Two souls refusing to surrender their truth. But the storm still had one last twist. Late that night, Keanu received a message from a friend who worked inside the industry. The man who had been following them had sold not only videos, but also private details that were never meant for the public. Their conversations, their meetings, even moments of silence had been reduced to cheap stories. It was not just noise anymore, it was cruelty. Keanu's calm expression hardened for the first time. He knew they could not let this continue. The next day, he and Sydney made a choice. Not to hide, not to fight with anger, but to step into the light together. They agreed to appear in front of cameras once more, not to explain, not to defend, but to speak with the same honesty that had first connected them. They knew the risk. They knew the noise might not stop, but they also knew that resilience sometimes demands facing the storm openly, not from the shadows. As the evening drew near, they prepared themselves. Sydney's hands trembled, but her spirit was stronger now. Keanu stood beside her, calm and steady, his presence like a shield. The world waited for their words, eager for drama, for scandal. But what they would soon hear was not what they expected. The night of their decision arrived. The hall was filled again, cameras lined up, lights glowing, the same kind of stage where it all had begun. But this time, there was no script, no questions prepared, no host to guide them. It was just Keanu and Sydney, standing side by side, facing the weight of the world's noise. The air was thick with expectation. Everyone wanted a headline, a confession, or a fight. No one expected what they were truly about to hear. Sydney's hands trembled as she held the microphone, but when she looked at Keanu, his steady gaze calmed her. She took a breath, then spoke. Her voice shook at first, but soon it grew stronger. "People have said many things about us, things that are not true, things that hurt. But I am not here to fight those words. I am here to tell the truth. I am human. I have felt pain. I have felt loneliness. That night when I spoke to Keanu, I spoke as someone searching for honesty, not attention, and I will never regret that." The room grew silent. Her words were not defensive, not angry. They were pure. Then Keanu stepped forward. His voice was low, calm, but carried a weight that filled the hall. "I have lived long enough to know that storms will always come. People will always twist what they do not understand. But what matters is not the noise, it is the truth we choose to hold on to." Sydney and I shared words that night that came from honesty and respect. Nothing more, nothing less. And if the world cannot accept that, then so be it. Because kindness is stronger than noise, and resilience is stronger than shadows. The audience listened, some leaning forward, some holding their breath. The words were not the dramatic confession they expected. They were something greater. They were a reminder that humanity is not built on headlines, but on truth, humility, and respect. And in that moment, the storm began to shift. The cameras captured it, but this time, the story could not be twisted so easily. The world had seen tears in Sydney's eyes and the calm strength in Keanu's voice. They had seen two people refusing to let cruelty define them. Slowly, the noise outside began to fade. Not completely, not forever, but enough for the truth to be heard. In the days that followed, messages poured in, not of judgment but of gratitude. Strangers wrote that they felt seen, that hearing Sydney's honesty gave them courage, that Keanu's calm reminded them not to give up. What had begun as twisted noise had transformed into something unexpected: hope. Sydney found her spirit lighter. She no longer trembled at headlines because she knew the truth was stronger. Keanu, though still quiet, felt a rare peace, knowing that honesty had not been broken by the storm. Together, they had walked through shadows and chosen resilience. And though the world would move on, chasing the next story, the moment they shared would remain, an example that kindness does not bow to noise, and that truth, even when whispered, can silence a storm.